If you haven't seen our latest horror short, ASMR, make sure you watch that first because, as always, spoilers. Anyway, here's a little background on how ASMR came to be. So, I can't really say I'm a huge fan of ASMR or anything, but I do find it to be pretty interesting, and sometimes kind of creepy. We knew there was a way to make a horror film centered around ASMR, but it took some time to figure out the best way to do it. Instead of it just being about someone watching an ASMR video, we wanted to actually give the viewer a real auditory experience. That meant using sound to drive the story. We began shooting this without a script, partly because we're impatient, and partly because we knew Misha, the ASMR host, would undoubtedly inspire us to shape the story around her performance. Misha improvised pretty much the entire thing, and as expected, she did a truly incredible job. Victoria and I were creeped out just watching her, and I was wearing headphones during the recording, so that was just uncomfortable. It was actually Misha's original performance that helped us figure out what the scares would be. For example, she brought a hairbrush from home and used it to pluck the bristles and brush her hair. That gave us the idea to include the monster claw emerging from the darkness behind Victoria, caressing her hair. She also brought a comb, which we ended up not using in the final cut, but there was definitely some cool material there.
Did you ever notice that the teeth sound a bit like a grasshopper?
Misha's repetition of the word relax gave us a direction to go in for the end. Still, we wanted to somehow connect Misha's performance to the events that take place in the bedroom. We both thought it would be a lot creepier if they sort of interacted in a very subtle way. And so after shooting Misha's entire ASMR video, we decided it's probably best to actually write a script. Victoria wrote the first draft. She repeated a lot of what Misha came up with on day one, and she added some clever ways to have them interact. Like, for example, when Victoria stands up and Misha moves her head toward the door. That was something we scripted and had to reshoot on day 2. Perhaps it wasn't the most efficient way to develop the story, but whatever, I think it worked out fine and it was definitely more organic. This way we were sort of able to see how Misha would play this and then develop the character and even parts of the story around her. I wouldn't always recommend doing it this way, but if you have the time, why the hell not? The shoot itself was incredibly easy. Why? Well, because I already made every lighting mistake on our last short, Chain Letter, and basically just applied everything I learned to this one. I set up this ring light outside the window as artificial moonlight, and these LED bulbs with blue gels for a nice ambiance. Since the TV was on the entire time, I had this battery-operated LED light with some toilet paper taped on as diffusion to act as the light emanating from the TV. The opening shot was probably the most difficult to set up, but still wasn't too difficult. I used this glide gear dolly and mounted one end on a tripod and the other end on our bed. Believe it or not, everything on the television was done practically. I cut together the best takes of Misha's performance and then privately uploaded it to YouTube, which I could stream wirelessly to our TV set. That way, there weren't as many ugly wires or HDMI cables just sticking out the back of the TV. I could have airstreamed it directly from my phone, but this is an older TV and it just didn't have that function. I added cue cards to the video on the TV so that we would know which part was which. During the moments where the actions on the TV had to match the actions of Victoria, I added a 3-beep countdown so she would know exactly when to do certain things, like press a button on the remote or stand up or sit down. Here's how it looked when we filmed. The edit took about a full day, maybe a day and a half including the sound design. I added a denoise filter to Misha's audio so that the dialogue would sound a bit more crisp and it wouldn't have that annoying hissing sound. The denoise filter doesn't always work well, but if you're talking closely into the microphone like I am right now, then it actually works surprisingly well. Here's what the audio sounded like before the denoise filter was added.
Do you remember when you were young and your mother used to brush your hair?
And here's how it sounded after it was added.
Do you remember when you were young and your mother used to brush your hair?
Big difference, I think. In my other videos, I talked about how I make those white demon eyes by just motion tracking still images of their eyeballs on top of the video clip. A similar method is applied to widen the mouth. Like when she screams at the end, I don't know how noticeable it is, but her mouth is unnaturally big. In After Effects, I motion tracked the movement of her mouth and applied that to a null object. Then I made a new adjustment layer and dragged the Liquify filter onto that. Using the Liquify filter, I stretched her mouth open until it looked pretty good, and with the Pick Whip tool, tied that motion tracking info to the null object. Lastly, I just want to thank Sophia, Sarah, Laura, and David who support us on Patreon. We want to get you guys involved in our channel, so if you'd like to become a patron, we have a whole bunch of rewards, including your name in the credits of our films, shoutouts in our making of videos, and Q&As with Victoria and me. So yeah, check out our Patreon.